Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, along with Andrew Moran, Dave Patterson, Graham Noble, and John Clark. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation News' online TV program. Ever since CNN showed the real, extensively impaired Joe Biden for all the world to see, the man has been under siege. It took 90 minutes for elected Democrats, high-dollar influencers, and the media to publicly say the president was failing and needed to step aside for the good of the order. Well, that is except his wife, Dr. Jill, who was still propping him up on the campaign trail. Last-minute candidate changes have happened before, and there is a way to handle it. Just not this way so much. Dave, you and I remember when Richard Nixon resigned. He handled his plight much differently.
Well, for those whose memory is slightly foggy, it was roughly a half century ago next August or next month. He resigned August 9th, 1974, in a letter to the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. And it read very simply, "Dear Mr. Secretary, I hereby resign the office of the President of the United States. Sincerely, Richard Nixon." Kissinger then at 11:35, for those who like detail, 11:35 a.m. initialed it, and the Nixon presidency was officially over. The circumstances, however, of Nixon's registration, I think, are very different from those facing President Biden. But, also there are some similarities. It was clear that Nixon had lost the confidence of Congress and the American people. But it wasn't because he was incompetent or impaired, as is the case today, but because they saw him as untrustworthy and having disgraced the office. Today, of course, Democrats would see that as qualities of praiseworthy. But the motivation for Nixon's resignation, I think, are different than what people's perception might be. And it was consistent with his behavior throughout. When Nixon lost the 1960 election to Kennedy, the election fraud in Chicago was, that gave Kennedy Illinois, and the victory was historic by any measure. But Nixon refused to challenge those results because he said that there was no need for a constitutional crisis, which he thought would result. And
Right.
prior to his resignation, his motivation was very similar. There would have been an agonizingly long and drawn out impeachment process where the nation's business would suffer. And we were in the midst of a new relationship with China, withdrawing from Vietnam, and he saw that the greater evil for the country would be to continue in the morass that was Watergate, rather than his resigning. And so he did that. He told a member of his staff, incidentally, if he were to be impeached, he would do the impeaching. And of course he did. Biden's plight is more like President Johnson's, quite frankly. He lost the party's confidence and had strong opposition from within the party, with Robert Kennedy choosing to run against him.
Graham, Chicago is going to be the setting again. And this could be a bigger, better blasting riot time since the 1968 convention. I mean, is this kind of reminding us about Democratic karma?
It's going to be interesting to see how things at the Democratic National Convention turn out. I think everyone's anticipating that there's going to be a lot of trouble, and I think that's a given, really. I think it's going to be absolute chaos, to be honest. These various groups that are being funded and equipped and even trained behind the scenes by some very kind of nefarious ultra left-wing activists and operatives. They're going to descend on Chicago for sure. It's going to be interesting to see, because most of the protests, of course, are going to be nothing to do with Joe Biden's current plight, but they're going to be concerned with the Israel's military action in Gaza, and these people are fanatics.
Andrew, worldwide and from Canada, our northern neighbor, are we seeing the same kind of calls for, Biden to maybe rethink running for office? It just seems like I don't think we're the only ones. I think other people are concerned too.
How can you turn going to be out on, on your way to go, work tomorrow? Age wasn't, the idea that I'm too old. Anyway. No, but you're absolutely right. No, up here in Canada, not really. I think when it comes to the political brass, the media up here are focusing on whether or not Justin Trudeau is going to step down ahead of next year's election because of what happened in the by-election in Toronto. But when it comes to the average person, at least the people I've spoken to, what's funny is that, people who aren't even remotely interested in U.S. politics have known about Biden's cognitive decline for a long time. I've joked about it with my kid's principal, parent I've spoken to on the playground. We've joked about his performance. Of course, many of them don't know about his economic record, but they are aware of the hilarity behind Joe Biden's comedic genius. I think as for the viewpoint of his presidency, I think that will be interesting, looking forward, because historians, they're going to view his presidency as amazing, and he had the American Rescue Plan, saved America, the Green New Deal, Build Back Better, all this nonsense, and but I think for the most part, Americans will view Joe Biden like people view Jimmy Carter, that he was history's greatest monster of American politics because of how bad everything has been, despite the rosy outlook that's emanated from the White House and from the mainstream media for the last 3 years.
I just, I wonder. I mean, even he's lost the media, and that has been propping him up since the get-go. So, was that his last sliver of hope? I mean, he still has a few Democrats that are, sticking with him. But in all seriousness, when you have CNN almost mocking him, and I don't know anything about MSNBC, but it's obvious. Washington Post wrote his here this could be what if Joe Biden said these words, and it was basically Abraham Lincoln's farewell speech. So, I mean, all this matters presidentially when it comes down to a legacy. And I mean, what is this legacy going to be, John Clark?
Well, I think it's interesting that you fashioned this discussion with a jump off from Richard Nixon. And I wouldn't really have historically considered myself a Nixon apologist. But I think we can say with a firm conviction that Richard Nixon had more character than Joe Biden by withdrawing. But using that as a legacy issue, having lived in the UK for years, something that struck me, looking at this sort of a bird's eye view of our nation, is that the world found Watergate to be remarkable. And remarkable because the rule of law was intact and the highest power in the land was still subjected to that rule of law. And since then, we've had Bill Clinton, who showed some breakdown of that after the Lewinsky matter, in my opinion. We've had a Pope. His legacy was that he stepped down when he knew he lacked the mental acuity to serve his flock. We have a lot of legacy. How about the Reagan legacy? Something else that struck me is at the time in the 80s when Reagan was deteriorating mentally, the liberal media was horrible to him. Spitting Image did a whole series called The President's Brain is Missing. And we see the opposite now. So one of the contrasts with Nixon is not just the character of the office and the breakdown of rule of law and the increase in the power of the executive branch, and maybe what our country demands for integrity, but it's also a breakdown in the media. Where are the Woodward and Bernsteins, as we've seen in Assange? And now look at the media turnaround, and you're wondering if the media are going to rescue Joe Biden when they are tearing him apart like piranhas. This is Trotskyism. This is the beginning of the end of the Democratic Party, it seems to me. And I think that will be Joe Biden's legacy. Joe Biden's legacy will be what happens when you combine incompetence, a lack of integrity, a lack of accountability, and a lack of character to the greatest nation in the world. And then we have right behind him, number two, exhibiting many of the same attributes. So anyway, I think that's the legacy, and I think we're all in trouble. So it's really nothing to have mirth about.
Okay, so legacy aside, whether he does any kind of movement and stepping down or just continues to badger, what's going on with the Democratic Party right now? I mean, they seem to be all over the place. Graham, I know you've been covering this a little bit more than the rest of us. What do you see?
Well, I think obviously, you had the point there right after the debate, in the days after the debate, there was a growing, kind of a clamor for Joe Biden to step aside in favor of make way for somebody else. And then, of course, the Democrats themselves, after one elected Democrat, a congressional Democrat, came out and actually called for him to step down, then suddenly there was more of them jumping on that bandwagon. And I think that was going to continue, because I believe that the Democrats are terrified of Joe Biden continuing on. And I'm going to say this for two reasons. Number one, I think they realize that there's practically no possibility for him whatsoever to win the election, unless, of course, we're still a couple of months away. I mean, a major turnaround could happen between now and election day. But as things stand right now, he's got practically no chance, honestly, of winning this election. But even if he did, there's no way he's getting through another 4 years in the White House. And therefore, the Democrats know that there's going to be a crisis point during his second term, were he to get one, where he's going to have to go. And if he refuses to go at that point and he's continuing to deteriorate, then we have got literally a major national security and constitutional crisis in this country. Now, I don't believe that the Democrats who are calling for him to leave realized that he was going to so forcefully come out and basically tell them. He kind of wrote that letter to the congressional Democrats and he said, look, you know what?
Sit down.
You need to put this speculation aside. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying. I'm the only one who can beat Donald Trump. And so, you better basically, sit your butts down and get in line and do what I tell you. And I don't think they were expecting that result. So now all of a sudden the calls for him to step aside have almost completely disappeared. And they realized that they are stuck with him, which they really are. And that is a major problem for them.
The disenchantment, I believe, has been going on for a long time. It's been just below the surface. When President Biden had his stage directions in Europe and in Italy misinterpreted, and he walked away from the crowd. From that point on, you'll recall that the talking point was, well, these are cheap fakes. But they weren't cheap fakes. They were the pool video. Mm-hmm. And as soon as that became very obvious, the White House continued with the cheap fakes. They were a talking point they had prepared, because they've had these kinds of responses ready to go because they came so fast and almost immediately after the event. So there are things that have been taking place, I think, that the White House absolutely aware of, probably for 3 years. And they knew that this was going to come at some point. I think they're just really upset that, in fact, they were uncovered so close to the convention and so close to the election. That's what they're really upset about.
If I were a seasoned Democrat, though, I'd be insulted by Joe Biden's insinuation that only he's the only person qualified enough to beat Donald Trump. Even if I'm Vice President Kamala Harris, I'm thinking, what the heck? I could beat Donald. You don't think I'm qualified enough to beat Donald Trump? What are you, a racist? How could you say those things? And number two, Joe Biden, he's insisted, according to Karine Jean-Pierre during a recent press briefing, she insisted that Joe Biden, he intends to commit to serve another 4-year term if he's reelected. So who knows? Maybe he's holding another dog and pony show in a couple years from now if he wins in November.
I guess Biden forgot his own words that poor kids are just as smart as white kids.
Well, he is the first Black vice president, anyway. Well, Mr. Biden's legacy could be one of a man who spent his life on the government dole, or it could be one of a statesman that knew when to step aside for new leadership. Thanks, panel. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform: YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.